The air in the boardroom of Thorn Global was thin. It tasted of expensive cologne and cold ambition. Adriana sat at the far end of the 30-foot mahogany table. She looked small against the backdrop of the city skyline. Marcus Thorn sat at the head. He was the king of this glass castle. The board of directors flanked him. They were a wall of gray suits and silver hair. To them, Adriana was a ghost. She was a trophy wife from the docks. She was a mistake Marcus was finally fixing. Marcus slid a thick document across the polished wood. It stopped an inch from her hand. His smirk was sharp. "The board has voted, Adriana," he said. "Your lifestyle allowance is being terminated alongside our marriage. You are a liability to our stock price." A soft chuckle rippled through the room. One director leaned toward another. Back to the docks of the Little Mermaid, he whispered. The insult was loud enough to sting. Marcus leaned forward. He mocked her father's disappearance. He told her she was leaving with less than nothing. Adriana did not flinch. She picked up the gold pen. She signed the zero settlement divorce papers with a steady hand. "I hope you all kept your receipts," she said. Her voice was a low hum. The room erupted in laughter. They thought she had lost her mind. They thought she was broken. Adriana stood up and walked out. She did not look back. If you think Marcus is about to regret this day, hit that like button right now. You do not want to miss what happens next. Below the skyscraper, a vintage black sedan waited in the rain. Adriana stepped inside. An old man with a jagged scar across his cheek sat in the shadows. It was Vincenzo. He was her father's former consigliere. Her father, Silas Lucas, had not just vanished years ago. The legendary Mafia Boss had gone underground. He spent a decade buying Thorn Global's debt through a shadow entity called Lucas Holdings. The papers Adriana just signed were a trap. They contained a hidden change of control clause. Marcus thought he was stripping her bare. Instead, he had technically sold his entire share of the empire to her to finalize the settlement. Marcus was now an employee. He just did not know his boss was the woman he had just kicked out. 1 hour later, the boardroom was loud with the sound of popping champagne. Marcus and the board were celebrating their freedom. They were making plans to get the company. The double doors burst open. The heavy would hit the walls like a gunshot. Adriana walked in. She was not alone, for silent men in long black overcoats followed her. They were Lucas enforcers. Their presence turned the warm room cold. Adriana walked straight to the head of the table. She sat in the chair Marcus had just vacated. The board started to shout. They called for security. The lead enforcer stepped forward. He dropped a heavy leather folder on the table. It contained the title deed to the building. It contained the majority share certificates. The shouting stopped. The silence was heavy. Adriana leaned forward. Her eyes were like flint. "You laughed because you thought I was signing away my life," she said. "But my father taught me one thing. Never sign a paper you have not written yourself." She scanned the terrified faces of the men who had mocked her. "Gentlemen, you are not the board anymore. You are fired." She turned her gaze to Marcus. He was pale. His glass of scotch trembled. "And Marcus, security will show you to the docks. I hear they are hiring. The tables have turned. Comment revenge if you have been waiting for this moment." The enforcers closed in. They did not touch Marcus. They simply stood. Their shadows swallowed him. Marcus looked at the men. He looked at Adriana. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The champagne in his hand felt like lead. One enforcer gripped Marcus by the elbow. It was a firm, silent command. Marcus stumbled. He was led toward the door he had owned an hour ago. The board members watched in total silence. They did not help him. They did not speak. They were survivors, and they knew Marcus was already dead weight. The doors clicked shut behind him. The boardroom was quiet again. Adriana did not celebrate. She looked at the empty seat beside her. She remembered the rain outside. She remembered how she had reached this chair. Flashback to 60 minutes earlier. Adriana stood on the sidewalk. The cold rain soaked her thin blouse. She had no bags. She had no money. Marcus had seen to that. She reached for her phone to call a taxi. Her screen was black. Marcus had disconnected her line before the meeting ended. She stood alone. The city lights blurred in the downpour. Then, a pair of yellow headlights cut through the dark. A vintage black sedan pulled to the curb. It was a 1950s Rolls-Royce. It was a ghost from another era. The rear door opened. Adriana did not hesitate. She stepped inside. The interior smelled of old leather and expensive tobacco. A man sat in the corner. His face was a map of old wars. A jagged scar ran from his ear to his jaw. This was Vincenzo. He was the consigliere. He was a man who had kept the Lucas name alive in the shadows. Vincenzo did not smile. He handed her a black leather folder. It was cold to the touch. "It is done, Adriana," he said. His voice was like gravel grinding together. Adriana opened the folder. She looked at the documents inside. For 10 years, the world believed Silas Lucas was a runaway. They thought the Mafia Boss had fled the law. They were wrong. Silas Lucas was the architect. He had spent a decade playing a long game. He did not use bullets. He used interest rates. He used shell companies. He used Thorn Global's greed. Marcus Thorn thought he was a genius. He had expanded Thorn Global using massive loans. He didn't know who owned the banks. He didn't know who held his notes. Silas Lucas had systematically bought every cent of Marcus's debt. The papers Adriana had signed in the boardroom were the final piece. They were labeled as a divorce settlement. That was a lie. Hidden in the fine print was a debt-to-equity transfer clause. By divorcing Adriana, Marcus had triggered a default event. The moment his signature hit the paper, his debt became due. He could not pay. The contract stated that in the event of default, his personal shares would be liquidated. They would be transferred to the primary creditor. That creditor was Lucas Holdings. The sole heir to Lucas Holdings was Adriana. Marcus had signed his own execution warrant. He thought he was throwing a dock girl into the street. Instead, he had handed the keys to his empire to the daughter of the man he tried to replace. Vincenzo handed her a small gold USB drive. The Lucas crest was engraved on the side. "This is the master key," he said. "It controls the offshore accounts. Marcus thinks he has millions left. He is wrong. He has zero." Adriana clutched the drive. Her knuckles were white. "Why now, Vincenzo?" she asked. Vincenzo looked out the rain-streaked window. "Your father wanted you to see who Marcus really was. He wanted you to see the board's true faces. Now you know. Now you can lead." Adriana looked at the skyscraper. She saw the top floor glowing in the night. Marcus was up there laughing. He was drinking her father's scotch. He was sitting in her father's building. She looked at the folder. She looked at the gold key. The time for hiding was over. The Lucas bloodline was back. Are you enjoying the takeover? Subscribe now so you never miss a single chapter of Adriana's Revenge. The sedan pulled away from the curb. It did not go toward the docks. It circled the block. It headed back toward the entrance of Thorn Global. Vincenzo handed her a black blazer. It was tailored. It was sharp. It was armor. Adriana put on. She felt the weight of the gold ring on her finger. It was a signet of a boss. "We are going back in," Adriana said. Vincenzo nodded. He signaled to the 3 other black SUVs idling in the shadows. 12 men stepped out. They were all wearing long black overcoats. They were silent. They were ready. Adriana stepped out of the sedan. She did not feel the rain anymore. She walked toward the gold-plated elevators. The security guards started to move toward her. Then they saw Vincenzo. They saw the 12 men behind him. The guards stepped back. They lowered their heads. The elevator climbed. The floor numbers ticked upward. Adriana watched the reflection in the polished metal. She did not see a trophy wife. She saw a predator. The elevator dinked. The doors opened to the top floor. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses drifted from the boardroom. Adriana walked down the hall. Her heels clicked like a countdown. Comment revenge if you want to see Marcus lose everything in the next scene. She reached the double doors. She didn't knock. She didn't wait. She signaled the enforcers. The doors burst open. The party was over. The heavy oak doors hit the walls with the force of an explosion. The sound of clinking crystal died. Marcus Thorne stood at the head of the table. He held a glass of amber liquid. It was 50-year-old scotch. It cost more than a dock worker made in a year. He was laughing. The board of directors sat around him. They were flushed with victory. They were already dividing the spoils. The plan was on the table. 5,000 workers were to be fired by Monday morning. It would spike the stock price. It would trigger their year-end bonuses. Marcus froze with the glass at his lips. He looked at Adriana. He looked at the 12 men in black overcoats behind her. His smirk did not vanish immediately. It curdled. "Adriana," he said. His voice was thick with liquid courage. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face here. I told security to throw you in the gutter where you belong." He looked at the board and chuckled. They joined him. It was a nervous, hollow sound. Adriana did not speak. She walked toward the table. Her heels sounded like a hammer on a coffin lid. Vincenzo stepped into the light. The laughter stopped. The board members recognized a man with a scarred face. They recognized the shadow of the Lucas family. Marcus set his glass down. He reached for his phone on the table. He wanted to call the police. He tapped the screen. It was dead. A red padlock icon flickered once, then vanished. Holloway, the lead director, checked his own device. He frowned. "My tablet is unresponsive," he muttered. "It says access denied." Then the chime started. One by one, the phones on the table began to chirp. They were not messages of celebration. They were alerts. Marcus's phone buzzed aggressively. He picked it up. His face went from flushed to chalky white. Personal accounts secured by Lucas Holdings. Balance, $0. "What is this?" Marcus hissed. He looked at the board. "Is this a joke?" "It is no joke, Marcus," Adriana said. She stopped at the seat he had occupied for years. She did not sit. She loomed. Holloway stood up. His hands were shaking. "My corporate card just declined a transaction for caterers. Every account tied to this building is showing a zero balance. It is a glitch," Marcus barked. He was sweating now. The scotch was gone. Only fear remained. "We are a multi-billion-dollar entity. This is a cyber attack." "It is not an attack," Vincenzo said. His voice was a low, gravelly rasp. "It is a repossession." The monitor on the wall flickered to life. It did not show the stock market. It showed a legal ledger. It showed the debt Marcus had used to build his kingdom. It showed how that debt had been quietly bought by an entity called Lucas Holdings. Adriana looked at the board. "You all thought Silas Lucas was gone. You thought he left his daughter with nothing. You were wrong. He left me everything. And he taught me how to wait." Marcus tried to stand. His knees buckled. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table. "I signed the divorce. You took the settlement. You have no claim here." "The settlement was a trigger, Marcus," Adriana whispered. She leaned in close. "You signed a liquidation on default clause. By trying to leave me with nothing, you triggered the total recall of your debt. You did not just divorce a wife. You divorced your bank. If you are loving this total collapse, subscribe now and hit that like button. The king is about to lose his crown." The board members began to scramble. They weren't laughing now. They were checking their personal portfolios. They were realizing the truth. The Lucas Syndicate had swallowed Thorne Global while they were busy celebrating. Marcus looked at the men he called his friends. They were looking at the exit. They were looking for a way to save themselves. "Call IT." Marcus screamed. "Get the bank on the line." Vincenzo stepped forward. He placed a small gold USB drive on the table. The Lucas crest was engraved on the side. The master key, he said. It already finished the sweep. You are not just fired, Marcus. You are a trespasser. Adriana pulled out the chairman's chair. She sat down. The board members recoiled as if the chair were made of fire. The meeting is called to order, Adriana said. Marcus stared at her. He looked at the woman he had mocked. He looked at the predator sitting in his chair. The glass of scotch on the table was still cold, but his empire was already ashes. Adriana sat in the chairman's chair. The leather was cold. The scent of Marcus's expensive scotch hung in the air, but it was fading. As the board members scrambled and Marcus choked on his own disbelief, Adriana's mind drifted. The noise of the boardroom became a dull hum. She was no longer in a glass skyscraper. She was back in a dimly lit library smelling of old paper and gunpowder. She was 8 years old. Her father, Silas Lucas, sat across from her. He did not give her dolls. He gave her ledgers. He did not read her fairy tales. He taught her the language of numbers. Look at the margins. Adriana, Silas had whispered. His voice was like velvet over gravel. The numbers never lie. People lie. They lie with their eyes. They lie with their smiles. But a balance sheet is the truth. He had pointed to a row of red ink. This is a leak. Someone is stealing. Do you know how to find them? Adriana had shaken her head. Watch the man who celebrates the loudest when the ship is sinking, Silas said. That is your traitor. The memory snapped back to the present. Adriana looked at Marcus. He was shouting at the monitor. He was the loudest man in the room. Her father had been right. Adriana stood up. She did not want to be in this room as the woman Marcus had created. She walked into the private executive suite attached to the boardroom. Vincenzo followed her. He carried a garment bag. She stripped off the soft, pastel dress Marcus had picked for her. It felt like a costume. She cast it onto the floor. She stepped into a black power suit. The fabric was heavy. The cut was sharp. It was tailored for war, not for dinner parties. She buttoned the blazer. The silhouette in the mirror was no longer a trophy. It was a weapon. Vincenzo stood behind her. He held a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside sat a heavy gold signet ring. The Lucas Syndicate crest was carved into the face, a hawk clutching a broken arrow. Your father wore this when he took the city, Vincenzo said. He wanted you to wear it when you kept it. Adriana slid the ring onto her finger. The weight was significant. It was a tether to a legacy of blood and gold. She clenched her fist. The metal bit into her skin. It felt like home. She walked back into the boardroom. The transformation was total. The board members stopped their frantic phone calls. They stopped whispering. The woman who had left an hour ago was a victim. The woman who stood before them now was a boss. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see Adriana's full transformation into the head of the Lucas Syndicate. She walked to the head of the table. She did not look at Marcus. She looked at the board. My father spent 10 years preparing me for this day, Adriana said. He knew Marcus was a parasite. He knew you all were the host. She tapped the gold ring against the mahogany table. The sound was like a gavel. I was raised to read balance sheets before I could read books. I saw the debt Marcus was piling up. I watched as Lucas Holdings bought every single one of your souls. Holloway wiped sweat from his upper lip. Adriana, we were just investors. We didn't know the source of the capital. Adriana's eyes turned to ice. You knew the numbers didn't add up. You just didn't care as long as the dividends were high. You were the men who celebrated while the ship was sinking. She turned to Vincenzo. Bring in the new contracts. Vincenzo signaled to the men at the door. They stepped forward, placing a single sheet of paper in front of every director. These are your letters of resignation, Adriana said. You will sign them. You will forfeit your bonuses. You will walk out of here with your reputations intact. Or I can turn over the evidence of Marcus's money laundering to the feds. And since your signatures are on every filing, you can spend the next 20 years sharing a cell with him. The silence was absolute. The board members looked at the papers. They looked at the enforcers, standing behind them. Marcus let out a guttural scream. "You can't do this. This is my company." Adriana leaned over the table. Her face was inches from his. "It was never yours, Marcus. You were just holding the seat for the rightful heir." Holloway was the first to pick up a pen. He signed without looking up. One by one, the rest of the board followed. They were men of business. They knew when they were beaten. They knew a predator when they saw one. Adriana watched them sign away their power. She felt the ring on her finger grow warm. The Lucas legacy wasn't just about money. It was about control. She looked at Marcus. He was the only one left. He hadn't signed. He was shaking. "I'm not signing," he hissed. Adriana smiled. It was a cold, dangerous expression. "Then you'll be the only one the feds talk to." Vincenzo called the district attorney. The boardroom was a cage of high-strung nerves and frantic whispers. The directors were pacing. Holloway was wiping a thick layer of sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. They had all received the same encrypted alert. The anonymous owner of Thorn Global had arrived in the building. An emergency meeting was mandatory. Marcus Thorn stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows. He looked out at the city he thought he ruled. His hands were buried deep in his pockets to hide the tremor. He had spent the last hour trying to move funds. Every route was blocked. Every firewall he hit was branded with a single, terrifying logo, the Lucas Hawk. He turned as the heavy oak doors groaned. They didn't just open, they were cast aside. Adriana walked in. She was not the woman who had signed the papers 2 hours ago. The soft pastels were gone. She wore a black power suit that looked like it had been forged rather than sewn. Her eyes were cold. They were the eyes of a woman who had seen the bottom of the world and decided to climb out. She was not alone. 6 men followed her in a tight military formation. They wore long black overcoats that brushed the floor. They didn't stand like bodyguards. They didn't look around the room with curiosity. They stood with the bored, lethal patience of enforcers. These were the men who made people disappear. These were the ghosts of the Lucas Syndicate. The board members scrambled to their seats. They looked at the men in the coats. They looked at the heavy gold ring on Adriana's hand. The air in the room suddenly felt very thin. "Adriana," Marcus stammered. He tried to reclaim his seat at the head of the table. "What is this theatrical nonsense? Who are these men?" Adriana didn't stop until she reached the chairman's chair. She didn't wait for him to move. One of the enforcers stepped forward. He didn't say a word. He simply placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus collapsed back into a side chair like a folding doll. "The anonymous owner is here," Adriana said. Her voice was a low, steady blade. "You can stop looking at the door, Marcus. You are looking at her." The room went deathly silent. Holloway's handkerchief dropped to the floor. "I've been the owner for 3 years," she continued. "My father didn't just leave a legacy. He left a trap. He knew your greed would lead you to the bridge loans. He knew you would look for the cheapest capital without asking who signed the checks. Lucas Holdings has owned 51% of this company's debt since the day we married." She leaned forward, her hands resting on the mahogany. "Marcus, you thought you were marrying a dock girl to soften your image. You didn't realize you were marrying your landlord." One of the enforcers dropped a heavy black folder in front of Marcus. It hit the table with the weight of a gavel. "CTA, the real boss has arrived. Hit that subscribe button if you love a woman who knows how to take her power back." Marcus tore the folder open. His eyes darted across the pages. He was looking for a loophole. He was looking for a way out. All he found was his own signature on a dozen default waivers. By filing for a divorce that stripped Adriana of her lifestyle allowance, he had violated the equity stability clause of the master loan. He had personally triggered the takeover. "This is illegal," Marcus hissed. His face was a pale shade of gray. "You can't seize a public company this way." Vincenzo stepped forward from the shadows. His scarred face caught the light. "It isn't a seizure, Marcus. It's a foreclosure. And since you've been using company funds to pay off your gambling debts to the Moretti family, The SEC will be very interested in why you're suddenly broke. The board members recoiled. The Morettas were the Lucas family's blood rivals. Marcus had been sleeping with the enemy. Adriana looked at the board. You have two choices. You can sign the letters of resignation in front of you and leave with your pensions intact. Or you can stay and face the audit. I promise you, the audit will not be kind. Holloway reached for a pen. He didn't even look at Marcus. He signed. Then the next director signed. It was a domino effect of cowardice. Marcus watched his empire vanish in a flurry of ink and paper. He looked at Adriana. He looked for the girl. He used a mock. She wasn't there. You think you can run this city? Marcus spat. The Morettas won't let a Lucas back on the throne. You've just started a war. Adriana stood up. She walked around the table until she was standing directly over him. She gripped the signet ring on her finger. I didn't start a war, Marcus, she whispered. I'm just finishing the one my father started. She turned to the enforcers. Show the former CEO out, and make sure he leaves his key card. He won't be needing it where he's going. As Marcus was dragged from the room, Adriana sat in the chairman's chair. She looked at the remaining board members. They were waiting for her command. Now, she said, let's talk about the 5,000 people you were planning to fire. Adriana sat in the chairman's chair. It was a throne of cold leather and heavy mahogany. She did not feel the triumph Marcus had expected. She felt only the weight of the Lucas legacy. The boardroom was silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning and Marcus's ragged breathing. Adriana reached into the black folder. She pulled out a stack of gold-embossed share certificates. She threw them onto the table. They spread across the polish with like a winning hand of cards. Marcus stared at the names on the documents. Lucas Holdings, Lucas Holdings, Lucas Holdings. You never owned this empire, Marcus, Adriana said. Her voice was flat. It was clinical. You were a glorified caretaker. My father allowed you to build it because he knew your greed would make it grow faster than his patience ever could. Marcus grabbed one of the certificates. His fingers left damp smudges on the paper. This is impossible. I check the filings every quarter. You checked the filings we wanted you to see, Adriana replied. She leaned forward. Her hands were clasped over the gold signet ring. You were so busy looking at the stock price that you forgot to look at the debt. Every expansion, every merger, every aggressive takeover you spearheaded was funded by Lucas Capital. She tapped a specific paragraph in the master loan agreement, the change of control clause. It was the poison pill Silas Lucas had planted years ago. The moment you signed those divorce papers, you declare me a third-party adversary to your personal estate, she explained. Under Section 9 of your credit facility, that constitutes a hostile change of control. It triggered an immediate acceleration of all outstanding debt. Marcus's eyes darted around the room. He looked at the board members who had already signed their resignations. He looked at the enforcers, standing like statues against the glass walls. I'll pay it, Marcus hissed. I have the liquid assets. I have the offshore accounts in the Caymans. Vincenzo stepped forward. He held a tablet showing a series of scrolling transaction logs. The Lucas Master Key didn't just lock you out, Marcus. It reclaimed the collateral. Your offshore accounts were tied to Thorn Global's credit lines. When the company defaulted, the banks followed the chain. Vincenzo scrolled to the bottom of the page. You are currently sitting at a net worth of negative $12 million. The penthouse is gone. The cars are gone. Even the watch on your wrist is technically property of Lucas Holdings now. The reality hit Marcus like a physical blow. He was a man who defined himself by the zeros in his bank account. Now there were none. He had no money. He had no home. He had no name. You think you can just take it? Marcus screamed. His face turned a violent shade of purple. I built this. I worked for this. You're just a parasite living off a dead man's shadow. He lunged. It was a desperate, uncoordinated move. He scrambled across the table, his hands reaching for Adriana's throat. He wanted to tear away the calm expression on her face. He didn't get close. The two enforcers at the door moved with the speed of striking cobras. One caught Marcus by the shoulder. The other grabbed his throat, pinning him against a mahogany table. The wind left Marcus's lungs in a pathetic wheeze. His cheek was pressed against the very share certificates that had destroyed him. Adriana did not move. She did not blink. She watched him struggle like a fly in a web. If you are loving this ultimate downfall, make sure to subscribe now so you never miss a Mafia story update. We are reaching the final reckoning. Let him up, Adriana commanded. The enforcers stepped back. Marcus slumped to the floor. He stayed there for a moment, gasping for air. He looked up at Adriana. The arrogance was gone. Only a raw, ugly desperation remained. I gave you everything, he whimpered. I made you a thorn. No, Adriana said. She stood up. The gold ring caught the light of the setting sun through the windows. You tried to turn me into a ghost. But ghosts have a way of coming back to haunt the people who killed them. She walked around the table. She stood over him. Marcus looked small from this height. He looked like the man he had always been underneath the expensive suits, a small man with a big appetite. Vincenzo handed her a small plastic bag. Inside was a cheap burner phone and a $20 bill. Adriana dropped it on the floor next to Marcus. My father told me you should always leave a man with enough to call his mother, she said. But since yours never liked me, I suggest you call a lawyer. You're going to need one when the SEC starts asking about the Moretti accounts. Marcus looked at the burner phone. He looked at the $20. It was the ultimate insult. It was the same amount of money Adriana had in her pocket the day they met at the docks. Get him out of my sight, Adriana said. The enforcers grabbed Marcus by the arms. They didn't use the elevator. They led him toward the service stairs. They wanted him to feel every step of the descent. Adriana turned back to the room. The board members were gone. The champagne was flat. The city lights were beginning to flicker on below, a sea of gold that now belonged to her. She picked up the gold USB drive. She felt the power humming through the metal. Thorn Global was hers. The Lucas Syndicate was back in the light. But she knew the Morettis wouldn't stay quiet for long. Vincenzo approached her. He looked at the empty boardroom. What is the first order of business, boss? Adriana looked at the empty chairman's chair. Rehire the 5,000 workers Marcus fired, she said, and find out where the Morettis are hiding their debt. I'm not done shopping yet. The boardroom was empty. The silence was absolute. The scent of Marcus's panic had been replaced by the neutral smell of ozone and rain. Adriana did not linger. She walked out of the glass tower and into the night. Vincenzo drove the vintage sedan through the winding streets of the old district. They stopped at a high stone wall covered in ivy. Behind it lay a secret garden that didn't appear on any city map. It was a sanctuary of green hidden in a desert of concrete. Adriana walked down the gravel path. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and damp earth. At the center of the garden sat an older man in a white linen suit. He was clipping roses with surgical precision. Silas Lucas did not look like a dead man. He looked like a man who had found peace in the shadows. He set the shears down and looked at his daughter. You have the ring, Silas said. His voice was stronger than she remembered. I have the company too, Father, Adriana replied. Silas stood up. He walked to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. The grip was firm. I never doubted you. Marcus was a necessary test. You needed to see how a man destroys himself with arrogance. Now, you know how to build something that lasts. He looked at the skyline glowing beyond the garden walls. The Lucas name is no longer a memory. It is the law again. The empire is yours, Adriana, not because I gave it to you, because you took it back. Adriana felt the weight of the moment. She wasn't the girl in the library anymore. She was a successor. Subscribe to the channel, and like this video if you think Adriana is the strongest Mafia boss yet. Silas handed her a single glass key. It was a physical override for the city's private fiber network. It was the heart of the Lucas surveillance system. The Morettas will come for you, Silas warned. They think you are soft because you spent years as a thorn. Show them they are wrong. I already have, Father. Adriana left the garden as the sun began to break over the horizon. She did not return to the penthouse she once shared with Marcus. She went to the penthouse of the Lucas Tower. She stood on the balcony. The wind was cold at 60 stories up. It whipped her hair around her face. Below her, the city was waking up. Thousands of cars moved like ants. Thousands of people were starting their day, unaware that their world had changed overnight. She looked down at her hands. The gold signet ring caught the first rays of the sun. It glowed like a dying star. She remembered Marcus's face as he was led away. She remembered the laughter of the board. They had viewed her as a placeholder, a trophy, a victim. They were all gone now. Adriana leaned against the railing. She felt the vibration of the city beneath her feet. She wasn't a wife. She wasn't a dock girl. She wasn't a thorn. She was Adriana Lucas, and she was finally home. She turned away from the view and walked into her office. The monitors were already live. The data was flowing. The empire was silent, but it was breathing. And for the first time in 10 years, Adriana Lucas was the one in control.